prison. But thereafter was absolute hell because so many of our people were down there. We were in occupancy, temporary occupancy of the 88th floor of the North Tower prior to moving permanently into the 91st floor of the North Tower. And so my children, two of my children, Roger and Lisa, both work with me. They were on their way to work at 9 o'clock. Many others, about 100 people with us on their way to work. And as it turns out, had the plane struck 15 minutes later, our firm would have been decimated. As it is, we lost 4 of our people, 2 of whom I had hired just a few weeks prior to that. And there are 6 children among them. And it was a horrendous, horrendous experience.
There was another data bit. All of the air defense systems in that part of the country had been turned off that day.
The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place.
The National Reconnaissance Office in Chantilly, Virginia, is preparing for an exercise in which a small corporate jet crashes into their building. NORAD is in the middle of a number of military exercises. The first, Vigilant Guardian, is described as an exercise that would pose an imaginary crisis to North American air defense outposts nationwide. The second, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets to Canada and Alaska to fight off an imaginary Russian fleet. 3 F-16s from Washington, D.C.'s National Guard at Andrews Air Force Base, 15 miles from the Pentagon, are flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina. This left 14 fighter jets to protect the entire United States.
They were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not exercise manifest.
And they would ask the commissioners, why didn't you deal with the war games? And the commissioners said, oh, well, we were told that was unimportant.
AP learned of the drills because at a Homeland Security function after 9/11, they bragged about it. Oh, we had foresight. We were running drills that very morning. Then senior FAA officials ordered air traffic controllers to shred the tapes from 9/11 in violation of federal law.
The stand-down order was given on 9/11, canceling the military's own standard operating procedures for dealing with hijacked airplanes.
NORAD was founded in 1957, and generals always had the power to shoot down or intercept hijacked aircraft.
Such interceptions usually occur within 10 to 20 minutes after the first sign of trouble. This is a routine procedure happening about 100 times a year. If you've read the story in Popular Mechanics, you know, one of their big lies is, oh, gee, there's only been one such interception in the last several years. No, it's a routine procedure, about 100 times a year.
But on June 1st, 2001, just 3 months before 9/11, Dick Cheney ordered Donald Rumsfeld to allow him to take control of NORAD itself and the shoot-down procedure, and remove that power from the general. Here is a copy of the memorandum from Rumsfeld to the Joint Chiefs, telling them they no longer have any authority.
All of the air defense systems had been turned off. Why? Apparently because the vice president was out in Colorado and he ordered them turned off. Why would you turn off all of the air defense systems on that particular day unless you knew something was going to happen? It's a dot. It's information, but strange that everything got turned off that day. Dot. There was an exercise that was designed for the air defense systems that was an attack on the towers. by airplanes. Isn't that strange that we had an exercise that mimicked what really happened? Strange that we had planned an exercise that was exactly what happened. And at the same time, the air defense systems were turned off. Don't you find that strange? I find that weirdly strange. Dot, yeah, just a piece of information. But how does it correlate with everything else? See, so you see the dots. You have all of these dots. They're just bits of information. But that's exactly how the intelligence world works. You get a bit of information here, you get an information here, a bit here, and a bit here, and pretty soon you've got a picture. To me, what does the picture say? Picture says that what we heard and were told in the newspapers, the media, was not the real story. If there's enough doubt in the official story, where the stories are absolutely not consistent with what happened, that they paint a different picture than the one that was given to the media, how easy is it for you to shift your belief system from I totally believe in my government, to oh my God, what's going on? And that's exactly where I went in all of this. Because my belief system is so strong from age 5, when I can remember, standing on the parade ground at attention, without anybody telling me to do that at West Point. I did it because I wanted to do it, because I believed. And then going to the military academy, serving, defending. The real story was, or I have a question, I guess. The real story to me is, who was the real enemy? Who participated in this? Who planned this attack? Why was it planned? Were the real terrorists the people in Arab clothing, or were the real people that planned this the people sitting in the authority in the White House?
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
1 year before 9/11, on September 11th, the year 2000, the neocon organization that called themselves Project for a New American Century, or you may have heard the acronym PNAC or PNAC, actually called in one of their publications for a new Pearl Harbor.
This famous quote is from the Project for New American Century manifesto from page 51. Quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor," unquote. As the Project for New American Century manifesto was being published, this offer was made to producer Aaron Russo a full year before 9/11.
I met Rockefeller through a female attorney I knew, who called me up one day and said, one of the Rockefellers would like to meet you. I had made a video called Mad as Hell, and he'd seen the video and wanted to meet me, and knew I was running for governor of Nevada. So sure, I'd love to meet him. And I met him, and I liked him, and he was a very, very smart man. And we used to talk and share ideas and thoughts. And he's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told me who that was going to be. But there was going to be an event. And out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan to run pipelines from the Caspian Sea. We we were going to invade Iraq, you know, to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. And we'd go after Chavez in Venezuela. And sure enough, later 9/11 happened, and I remember he was telling me how how you're gonna see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places, and there's going to be this war on terror, of which there's no real enemy, and the whole thing is a giant hoax, you know. But it's a way for the government to take over the American people.
He told you it was going to be a hoax.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. There's no question. He says there's going to be war on terror, and he's laughing. There's no who are we fighting? I mean, why do you think 9/11 happened, and then nothing's happened since then? Do you think that our security is so great here that these people who pulled off 9/11 were able to can't knock down another plane? Come on, it's ridiculous. 9/11 was done by people in our own government and our own banking system to perpetuate the fear of the American people and to subordinating themselves to anything the government wants them to do.
If he joined them, Russo was told, he would, quote, be spared the police state measures, the domestic surveillance state measures, that would be imposed on the rest of the American public. "9/11, in my very educated opinion, was not just an evil inside plot, it was a diabolical inside plot, whose purpose was, in my opinion, to terrorize the United States into putting Israel's interest above our own. I call that treason. To get the United States military into the Middle East, as Nicholas Rockefeller told Russo a year before 9/11. This was a long-time goal of the Project for New American Century U.S. and Israeli Zionists, to effect Israel's goals using American blood and treasure, which is still happening. CENTCOM, which stands for Central Command, the Central Combatant Command of the United States military of the Pentagon, had already, before 9/11, been moved to the Middle East. You would think that CENTCOM would be centered over the United States. Well, one of the reasons for that is, as you have already learned, there was no combatant command over the mainland United States until immediately after 9/11, when they created NORTHCOM for that very purpose.
Reported dual Israeli-U.S. citizen Paul Wolfowitz was Deputy Secretary of Defense, number 2 immediately under Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld.
Richard Pearl, reported dual U.S. Israeli citizen, proclaimed himself one of the top Project for New American Century Manifesto signatories. He self-proclaimed himself the Prince of Darkness. And he chaired Rumsfeld's Defense Policy Board.
If Richard Pearl is the Prince of Darkness, Dov Zakheim is the king. Dov Zakheim is a rabbi and reported dual U.S. Israeli citizen. He wrote a paper advocating a staged catastrophic event to force the United States into war to reconfigure the Middle East in Israel's interest, and presented it to the Project for New American Century before they wrote the Project for New American Century Manifesto. And Zakheim is credited with the actual new Pearl Harbor quote in that manifesto. Zakheim headed all of the Pentagon's accounts as its DoD comptroller under Rumsfeld, as the $2.3 trillion was announced being missing the day before 9/11 on September 10th.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
CIA whistleblower Susan Lindauer says it was really $9.1 trillion and that it had gone for Israel. Pentagon auditors tracking the missing money, killed on 9/11 by inside explosives in the Pentagon, and the records were destroyed. Zakheim was the chief executive officer of Systems Planning Corporation, a defense contractor that specialized in remote control of airplanes, especially drone aircraft, used in U.S. military exercises, and a special system which destroyed them in their terminal phases. This is what the evidence shows actually happened at the Pentagon on 9/11. Systems Planning Corporation had a subsidiary that actually oversaw the 1993 World Trade Center 1 attack, so-called investigation, and through that investigation obtained the secret World Trade Center blueprints, which were needed to know where to plant controlled demolition explosives throughout the building. Dov Zakheim arranged for the Pentagon to receive leased converted Boeing 767 fuel tanker planes, which are consistent with what eyewitnesses saw of the plane that actually struck World Trade Center 2 on 9/11. Reported dual Israeli-U.S. citizen Philip Zelikow headed the 9/11 Commission cover-up as its executive director.
Reported dual U.S. Israeli citizen Michael Chertoff headed the Department of Justice alleged, quote, investigation, which is a cover-up of 9/11, and became the second new Department of Homeland Security director. So we must ask, whose homeland and whose security?
The insider 9/11 plot was the highest evil because it was premeditated. It was based on a Hitlerian scale big lie. We have seen that not just the whole official story of 9/11 is a lie, but every single individual part of it is a lie. The 9/11 plot was designed to kill masses of our innocent fellow citizens. It was designed to falsely blame and demonize Muslims who could not have done it and did not do it. It was created to justify the invasion of their lands in the Middle East for geopolitical power, oil, and Israel's interest. The aggressive 9/11 wars that have killed hundreds of thousands, displaced millions, and cost our country trillions are based entirely on lies and are the highest crime under international law and the Nuremberg Principles, which we wrote as the victors over the Nazis in World War II. So what is the source of this high evil? Incredibly, it is the mentality of Nazism. So who and what are the neocons really? The 9/11 Pentagon neocons, Wolfowitz, Prince of Darkness himself, Richard Pearl, Shalabi, Khalilzad, were all students and are followers of neocon chief philosopher Leo Strauss. They all studied under Professor Strauss at the University of Chicago, and Professor Strauss' ideology is even more extremist than his personal mentor and sponsor in Germany, Hitler's own legal theorist Carl Schmitt. The Schmitt-Strauss doctrine is that the state needs enemies and must create them if necessary, and must fabricate lies for the many, for the people, while its leaders, quote, embrace the darkness, unquote.
We also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We're going to spend time in the shadows.
Leo Strauss taught that, quote, those who are fit to rule are those who realize there is no morality and that there is only one so-called natural right, the right of the superior man to rule over the inferior. This is from Leo Strauss and the American Right, a book published about Strauss's so-called philosophy in 1997. Leo Strauss's neocons literally brainstormed the attacks of 9/11 decades before those attacks. Attorney Stanley Hilton studied under Leo Strauss with Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl at the University of Chicago. Hilton's senior thesis under Strauss detailed a plan to establish a presidential dictatorship in the United States using a fabricated Pearl Harbor-like incident as its justification. Stanley Hilton, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, Leo Strauss, and others discussed an array of different plots and incidents like September 11th and flying airplanes into buildings way back in the 1960s. And note that the book that Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, passed out hundreds of copies of shortly before the 9/11 attacks was the 1962 book by top neocon Roberto Wolfstetter. The 9/11 neocons' mentor's mentor, therefore, was Hitler's own justifier of evil, Nazi Carl Schmitt. This is a quote from Professor Francis Boyle, an internationally renowned professor of international law at the University of Illinois. Quote, Schmidt was the most notorious Nazi law professor of his day, justifying every atrocity the Nazis inflicted on everyone. We're talking about the Holocaust. We must understand that these so-called neoconservatives are, in fact, neo-Nazis. They espouse the Nazi doctrine of Schmidt and Strauss and Machiavelli and Nietzsche, the doctrine of the Superman, unquote. This is what internationally acclaimed journalist Seymour Hersh had to say. Quote, we, that is the United States, has been taken over basically by a cult. 8 or 9 neoconservatives, we've seen they're really neo-Nazis in their mentality, have somehow grabbed the U.S. government. Just how and why they did it so efficiently, we'll have to wait for much later historians and for better documentation than we have now. But they managed to overcome the federal bureaucracy and the Congress and the press with the greatest of ease. This does say something about how fragile our democracy is. Unquote. Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell in the Bush-Cheney administration, about this same coup said, it's not a coup, it's worse. This is how retired 4-star U.S. Army General and top NATO commander Wesley Clark put it in a 2003 public address at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us.
Then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said,